They called us barbaric, primitive, a species too young and too violent to understand the delicate art of galactic diplomacy. For 300 years, humanity sat at the children's table of the Galactic Council, our voices dismissed, our concerns ignored, our sovereignty trampled beneath the boots of superior civilizations. But here's what they never understood about humans. We don't just walk away from a fight we can't win. We walk away from a game we refuse to play. When Ambassador Sarah Chun stood up in that gleaming council chamber on Nexus Prime, looked into the compound eyes of the Zephyrian High Counselor, and said those 5 words that would reshape the galaxy forever, humanity withdraws from this council, she wasn't surrendering. She was declaring war on their entire system. What followed wasn't conquest or destruction. It was something far more terrifying to species that had grown comfortable in their hierarchies and traditions. It was innovation unleashed. It was human ingenuity freed from the chains of bureaucratic approval. It was the moment a young species decided to show the galaxy what they could accomplish when nobody was watching. The Galactic Council thought they were losing a minor member state. They had no idea they were about to face their own extinction. This is the story of how humanity walked away from diplomacy and why the galaxy would never be the same again. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched like a cathedral of power across Nexus Prime, its crystalline walls refracting the light of 17 different stars into a rainbow that should have been beautiful, but instead felt cold and calculating. Ambassador Sarah Chun had walked these halls for 15 years, and in all that time, she had never once felt welcome. Today would be the last day she ever had to. The morning session had begun like every other council meeting in the past 3 centuries since humanity's admission. The Zephyrians dominated the proceedings with their elaborate ritualistic speeches, their translucent wings catching the starlight as they gestured with the kind of practiced arrogance that came from 10,000 years of believing themselves the galaxy's natural rulers. The Vrexian delegation sat in their traditional positions of honor, their scaled forms radiating the quiet menace of a warrior culture that had learned to wrap its violence in diplomatic language. Between them, scattered across the lower tiers like afterthoughts, sat the representatives of 43 minor species. Humans among them, relegated to Section C, Subsection 7, Row 12. The children's table, as Sarah had come to think of it. The current debate concerned trade rights through the Kepler Corridor, a stretch of space that included 27 human colonies. Sarah had submitted the formal position papers 6 months ago. Earth's government had a legitimate claim to regulate traffic through their own territory, especially given the increasing incidence of Vrexian merchants dumping industrial waste in human systems. High Counselor Zelix of the Zephyrian Empire raised one elegant, translucent hand, and the hall fell silent with the kind of immediate obedience that made Sarah's jaw clench. "The matter before us today," Zelix said, his voice carrying the musical quality of his species, but somehow managing to sound patronizing, concerns the concerns raised by the human delegation regarding corridor access rights. Sarah noticed how he paused before saying concerns, as if the very idea that humans might have legitimate grievances was amusing to him. She had heard that particular pause in his voice countless times over the years. "The Zephyrian position," Zelix continued, "is that corridor access must remain unrestricted in accordance with the Galactic Commerce Accords, as they have for the past millennium. Local restrictions by minor species create complications in the smooth functioning of galactic trade." Minor species. There was again. Sarah had been called many things in her diplomatic career, but minor species never stopped stinging. Counselor Vrextan of the Vrexian Trading Consortium rose from his position on the primary tier, his massive form casting shadows across the lower sections. "The Vrexian Consortium agrees with our esteemed Zephyrian colleagues," he rumbled, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "Human restrictions on waste disposal are economically inefficient. The humans possess the technology to clean their systems. It is more cost-effective for them to do so than for us to modify our disposal practices." Sarah felt her aide, Lieutenant Commander Jackson Reed, tense beside her. Jackson was military, on loan from Earth Defense, and he had never quite mastered the poker face that diplomatic service required. She could practically feel his desire to stand up and tell Vrextan exactly where he could dispose of his industrial waste. But Sarah had learned patience over the years. She had learned to wait for the right moment, to calculate the precise instant when words would have maximum impact. Today, however, she was done with patience. She stood. The action itself was unusual enough that conversations died across the hall. Minor species representatives didn't interrupt major power debates. They waited to be acknowledged, submitted their formal objections through proper channels, and accepted whatever scraps the council deigned to offer them. Ambassador Chen, Zelix said, and there was warning in his voice. The human delegation will have the opportunity to present their position during the designated response period. No, Sarah said quietly, but her voice carried in the sudden silence. We won't. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. In 3 centuries of human participation in the council, no human representative had ever simply said no to a high counselor. Zelix's large, compound eyes shifted colors from their usual golden hue to the deep purple that indicated confusion or irritation. I beg your pardon, Ambassador. Sarah walked down the steps of Section C, her footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. She could feel hundreds of alien gazes following her movement, could practically taste the shock radiating from the assembled delegates. Behind her, Jackson was probably having a panic attack, but she didn't look back. She reached the speaker's podium at the center of the hall, a position reserved for high counselors and heads of major delegations. No human had ever stood there. For 300 years, Sarah began, her voice calm and clear, humanity has participated in this council. We have followed your rules, respected your traditions, and accepted our place in your carefully constructed hierarchy. We have listened to debates about our own sovereignty as if we were children whose opinions might be interesting, but ultimately irrelevant. The hall was dead silent now. Even a constant background hum of translation devices seemed muted. Today, you are debating whether my people have the right to prevent other species from poisoning our worlds. You speak of this as if it were some complex philosophical question, some delicate balance between competing interests. But it isn't complex at all. Sarah's eyes found Vrextan's massive form. 27 human colonies. 47 million human lives. We're not discussing trade efficiency. We're discussing whether my children get to breathe clean air. Vrextan's scales shifted to the deep red that indicated anger. The human delegation speaks out of turn and with inappropriate emotion. These matters require rational discussion, not sentimental appeals. Sentimental? Sarah smiled, and Jackson would later describe it as the most terrifying expression he had ever seen on a human face. You think love for our children is sentimental? She turned to address the entire hall, her gaze sweeping across the tiers of alien delegates. You want to know what's sentimental? Believing that a system this broken can continue indefinitely. Believing that 43 minor species will continue to accept the scraps you offer them forever. Believing that intelligence and dignity are somehow related to the age of a civilization or the size of its military. High Counselor Zelix's wings spread slightly, a sign of growing agitation. Ambassador Chun, you are out of order. Return to your designated position, and no. Sarah's voice cut across as like a blade. I will not return to my designated position. Do you know why? The silence stretched taut as a wire. Sarah could see communication devices lighting up throughout the hall as delegates frantically contacted their home governments. History was happening here, and everyone could feel it, because as of today, humanity no longer recognizes the authority of this council. The explosion of sound that followed was unlike anything the Great Hall had ever heard. Delegates leaped to their feet, shouting in dozens of languages, their translation devices creating a cacophony of overlapping voices. Security forces started moving toward the podium, but Sarah raised her voice over the chaos. We tried your way, she called out, her words somehow cutting through the noise. 3 centuries of diplomacy. 3 centuries of compromise. 3 centuries of watching our legitimate concerns dismissed because we're too young, too small, too human to matter. But here's what you never understood about my species. The security forces had reached the podium, but something in Sarah's bearing made them hesitate. Perhaps it was the absolute calm in her voice. Perhaps it was the way she stood there like she owned the place. Or perhaps it was something deeper, some primitive recognition that they were witnessing the birth of something dangerous. When humans decide we're done with a system, Sarah continued. We don't just leave. We build something better. She reached into her diplomatic case and withdrew a small data crystal, holding it up so the entire hall could see it. This contains notification of withdrawal from 437 separate galactic treaties, accords, and trade agreements. Effective immediately, humanity considers itself no longer bound by any agreement that requires council oversight or approval. The crystal hit the floor of the podium with a sound like breaking glass. High Counselor Zelix had gone completely rigid, his wings trembling with barely contained fury. You cannot simply withdraw from the Galactic Order, Ambassador. No species can survive in isolation. You will be cut off from trade networks, defense agreements, cultural exchanges. Your colonies will be vulnerable to what? Sarah interrupted, and now her smile was sharp enough to cut steel. To the same pirates and raiders you've been ignoring when they attack human shipping? To the same economic predators you've been protecting under the guise of free trade? To the same casual cruelty you've been calling diplomacy for the past 3 centuries? She walked down from the podium, moving back toward the human section with measured steps. The security forces parted before her like water, apparently unsure whether to arrest a departing ambassador or simply let her go. You want to know the funny thing about humans? Sarah said, her voice carrying easily in the stunned silence. We're really good at making friends. And over the past 300 years, while we've been sitting quietly in our assigned seats, we've been talking to all those other minor species you've been ignoring. The implications of that statement hit the hall like a physical wave. 43 minor species represented billions of lives, thousands of worlds, economic and military resources that the major powers had always taken for granted. And if humanity had been building relationships, Ambassador Taith of the Altarian Republic was the first to stand, her crystalline form chiming as she moved. The Altarian Republic stands with humanity in this decision. The chiming sound was echoed by Ambassador Grix of the Centauri Federation as he rose to his feet, his 4 arms spread wide in the traditional gesture of alliance. The Federation recognizes humanity's right to self-determination. Like dominoes falling, delegates from the minor species began to stand. The Andromedan Collective, the Rigel Commonwealth, the Vegan Trade Union. 38 of the 43 minor species rose to their feet in support of humanity's withdrawal. The mathematics of the situation were suddenly, starkly clear. The major powers of the Galactic Council had just lost 60% of their membership, including species that controlled crucial trade routes, rare element deposits, and strategic military positions throughout the galaxy. Sarah had reached the human section now, where Jackson was staring at her with something approaching awe. Ma'am, he whispered, did we just declare independence? Sarah gathered her materials with calm efficiency. Yes, Lieutenant Commander. Yes, we did. High Counselor Zelix's voice was shaking now, though whether with rage or fear, Sarah couldn't tell. This is madness, Ambassador Chun. You're destroying an order that has kept the galaxy peaceful for millennia. Without the Council's oversight, there will be chaos, war. Sarah paused at the entrance to the human section and looked back at him. Your peace was built on the submission of species you considered inferior, Counselor. Your order required the silence of everyone who disagreed with you. And your oversight consisted of protecting the privileges of the powerful while ignoring the suffering of everyone else. She slung her diplomatic case over her shoulder with the casual ease of someone who had just finished a routine meeting. We're not destroying your order, Counselor Zelix. We're simply choosing not to participate in it anymore. The walk from Section C to the hall's main exit felt like it took forever and no time at all. Behind them, Sarah could hear the chaos erupting as the remaining council members tried to process what had just happened. Emergency sessions were being called. Security protocols were being activated. The carefully ordered hierarchy of galactic power was crumbling in real time. As they reached the exit, Jackson finally found his voice. Ma'am, what happens now? Sarah stepped through the doorway and into the corridor beyond, where her security detail was waiting with expressions of carefully controlled excitement. They had been monitoring the proceedings, and word was already spreading through the human diplomatic mission. Now, Lieutenant Commander, Sarah said, we show the galaxy what humans can build when nobody's telling us we can't. Behind them, The great hall of the Galactic Council continued to echo with the sound of an empire beginning to fall apart. But Sarah Chun didn't look back. She had more important things to do. The revolution had begun with a single word: no. Now came the hard part. Now came the work of proving that humanity's defiance had been more than just a gesture. Now came the task of building something worthy of the courage it had taken to walk away from the only galactic order they had ever known. But as Sarah walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime for the last time, she felt lighter than she had in 15 years. For the first time since humanity had joined the galactic community, they were truly free to be themselves. And Sarah Chan was very curious to see what humanity would do with that freedom. The emergency meeting convened aboard the human diplomatic vessel New Geneva exactly 6 hours after Sarah Chen's declaration. The ship hung in space beyond Nexus Prime's defensive perimeter, officially neutral territory, but, practically speaking, a refuge for species that had just burned their bridges with the most powerful political entity in the galaxy. Sarah stood before a holographic display showing the faces of 38 different alien ambassadors, each representing a species that had followed humanity's lead in walking away from the Galactic Council. The diversity was staggering even by galactic standards. Crystalline beings whose thoughts moved like light through silicon matrices. Gaseous entities that existed as sentient clouds contained within mechanical suits. Ancient races that had mastered technologies the Council barely understood, and young civilizations still taking their first steps into the broader galaxy. What they all shared was a history of being dismissed, overlooked, or actively oppressed by the Council's major powers. The immediate situation is clear, Sarah began, her diplomatic training keeping her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were discussing. As of today, 39 species representing approximately 60% of the Galactic Council's membership have declared independence from Council authority. The legal and political ramifications are significant. Ambassador Tkaith of the Altarian Republic chimed softly, the sound translating through her comm system as nervous laughter. Significant is one way to put it, Ambassador Chun. The Council has already frozen all trade agreements with our species. Zephyrian vessels are being diverted from our territory. We're receiving strongly worded communications from several major powers. Threats, rumbled Ambassador Grix of the Centauri Federation, his 4 arms gesturing emphatically. Call them what they are, Tkaith. They're threatening economic sanctions, trade blockades, even military intervention if we don't return to the Council immediately. Sarah nodded grimly. They had expected this response, but seeing it play out in real time was still sobering. What's our current status regarding essential supplies and trade routes? The holographic display shifted to show a galactic map, with trade routes highlighted in different colors. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, humanity's chief economic analyst, stepped forward to address the assembled ambassadors. The situation is challenging, but not catastrophic, Dr. Tanaka reported. Between our member species, we control approximately 40% of the galaxy's rare Earth deposits, 35% of agricultural output, and 60% of the advanced technology manufacturing capability outside of Council space. Those numbers drew surprised reactions from several ambassadors. The Council had always treated the minor species as dependent clients, but the reality was that their combined resources represented a significant economic power base. However, Dr. Tanaka continued, we're facing immediate shortfalls in energy distribution networks and faster-than-light communication infrastructure. The Council controls the primary hyperspace beacon network and most of the antimatter refineries. Ambassador Zexhai of the Andromedan Collective floated forward in her containment suit, her gaseous form shifting colors as she spoke. The Andromedans have maintained independent energy networks for security reasons. We can provide power grid support for 17 systems immediately. The Vegan Trade Union has been developing alternative FTL communication methods for the past 50 years, added Ambassador Core, his reptilian features thoughtful. Our quantum entanglement networks are smaller than the Council beacons, but they're completely independent and actually more secure. Sarah felt a spark of hope. What are you saying exactly? We're saying, Ambassador Grix interjected with something that might have been a smile on his alien features, that humanity wasn't the only species that saw this day coming. Some of us have been preparing for independence for decades. The revelation that followed transformed the entire nature of their crisis. As ambassador after ambassador shared what their species had been quietly developing, a picture emerged of a shadow economy that had been growing within the council structure for generations. The Rigel Commonwealth had been secretly developing faster-than-light engines that didn't require council-controlled fuel. The Altarian Republic had created manufacturing techniques that could produce advanced electronics without rare elements monopolized by the major powers. The Centauri Federation had built a parallel banking system that operated independently of council financial networks. "You've all been planning this," Sarah realized, looking around at the assembled holographic faces with new understanding. "For how long?" Ambassador Taith's crystalline form shimmered with what Sarah was learning to recognize as embarrassment. The Altarian government has been developing contingency plans for council withdrawal for approximately 87 years. Ever since the Tribunal of Vega incident. Sarah remembered the Tribunal of Vega from her diplomatic history courses. A minor species had attempted to petition the Council for protection from Vrexian mining operations that were strip mining their homeworld. The Council had ruled that economic efficiency took precedence over environmental concerns. The species had died out within 50 years. "We learned from Vega," Ambassador Zexai added, her form shifting to darker hues. "The Council will always choose the interests of the major powers over the survival of minor species. So we began to prepare for the day when we would have to stand alone." "But you never acted," Sarah said. "Why now? Why follow humanity's lead instead of making your own declaration years ago?" The silence that followed was telling. Finally, Ambassador Kor spoke for the group. "Because," he said simply, "humans are crazy enough to actually do it." Jackson, who had been quietly monitoring communications from the bridge, looked confused. "I'm sorry, what do you mean by that?" Ambassador Grix laughed, a sound like grinding machinery. "No offense intended, Lieutenant Commander, but your species has a reputation for impulsive decision-making. Most species plan for centuries before making major political moves. Humans plan for months or years, then act decisively when they reach their breaking point. We've been waiting," Taith added, "for someone with the courage to take the first step, to show the Council that their authority isn't absolute. Your Ambassador Chun provided that catalyst." Sarah absorbed this information, tried to process the implications. "So, this has been coordinated? You were all waiting for humanity to make a move." "Not coordinated," Ambassador Zexai corrected. "Anticipated. We've all been developing independence capabilities, but none of us were willing to face council retaliation alone. When humanity withdrew, it became possible for all of us to act." Dr. Tanaka stepped forward again, her expression thoughtful. "If that's the case, then our combined resources are significantly greater than our initial assessment suggested. Ambassador Taith, your manufacturing capabilities combined with Andromedan energy networks could support independent colonies indefinitely. And vegan communication systems with Centauri financial networks would create a complete alternative to council infrastructure," added Jackson, catching on quickly. Sarah felt the magnitude of the situation shifting around them. They weren't just a group of rebellious minor species facing impossible odds. They were the foundation of an entirely new galactic order. "We need a formal structure," she said. "Treaties, agreements, mutual defense pacts. If we're going to succeed, we need to function as a unified entity, not just a collection of rebels." "The Terra Alliance," suggested Ambassador Grix. "Named for humanity's homeworld, in recognition of the courage it took to take the first step." The name sparked immediate discussion among the assembled ambassadors. Some preferred alternatives that didn't center human identity. Others worried about appearing to be a human-dominated organization. But gradually consensus emerged. "The Terra Alliance," agreed Ambassador Taith, with the understanding that leadership roles will rotate among member species and that no single species will hold permanent authority over the others. "Unlike the Council," added Ambassador Kor with what Sarah was learning to recognize as vegan humor. The next 6 hours were a blur of negotiation, treaty drafting, and resource allocation. The framework that emerged was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Instead of hierarchical structures based on military power or economic dominance, the Terra Alliance was built on principles of mutual aid and voluntary cooperation. Each member species contributed what they could and received what they needed. The Andromedans provided energy technology in exchange for Altarian manufacturing expertise. The vegans shared communication networks in exchange for Centauri financial services. Humanity offered military protection and diplomatic coordination in exchange for access to technologies that could protect human colonies from Council retaliation. But as the alliance took shape, reports from Nexus Prime grew increasingly ominous. The Council's response was escalating rapidly from economic pressure to explicit military threats. High Counselor Zelix has declared the withdrawal illegal under Galactic law, reported Lieutenant Commander Sarah Park, Jackson's intelligence specialist. They're claiming that the minor species lack the legal standing to withdraw from treaties they entered voluntarily. What's the military situation? Sarah asked. Park's expression was grim. The Zephyrian Empire has mobilized 3 battle fleets and positioned them along Alliance territory borders. The Vrexian Consortium has begun seizing Alliance merchant vessels in neutral space, claiming safety inspections. And there are reports of Council-sponsored pirate attacks on Alliance colonies. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Council wasn't just applying economic pressure. They were preparing for war. How long before they moved to direct military action? Asked Ambassador Zexhai. Our intelligence suggests within 72 hours, Park replied. The Council is calling it a police action to restore order, but the fleet movement suggests a full-scale invasion. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her decision to walk away from the Council hadn't just affected humanity. She had potentially started a war that could engulf half the galaxy. But as she looked around at the assembled ambassadors, she saw not fear but determination in their alien features. These species had been preparing for this day for decades. They had known the risks, had calculated the costs, and had chosen freedom over safety anyway. Then, we need to be ready, Sarah said simply. How quickly can we establish a unified defense network? The Alliance fleet can be operational within 48 hours, reported Admiral Maria Santos, joining the conversation from the New Geneva's bridge. We have commitments from 15 member species for immediate military support. The numbers that followed were staggering. The combined fleets of the Alliance member species represented nearly 2,000 vessels of various classes, from human destroyers to Andromedan energy frigates to Centauri stealth ships. It wasn't enough to match the Council's major powers in direct combat, but it was enough to make the cost of invasion prohibitively high. What about defensive positions? Asked Sarah. The Rigel Commonwealth has offered their star fortresses as staging areas, reported Ambassador Kor. And the Altarian Republic has shield technology that can protect entire systems from bombardment. Sarah nodded, pieces of the strategy falling into place. Dr. Tanaka, how long can we maintain economic independence if the Council imposes a complete blockade? Indefinitely, assuming current resource allocation agreements hold, Dr. Tanaka replied. We'll face shortages in some luxury goods and specialized technologies, but essential supplies are covered by Alliance production. The realization was gradually dawning on everyone in the room. They had done more than declare independence from the Galactic Council. They had inadvertently created a parallel galactic civilization, complete with its own economic systems, military forces, and technological base. The Council made a critical error, observed Ambassador Tkaith, her crystalline form shimmering with what Sarah was learning to recognize as satisfaction. They treated us as dependent clients for so long that they never realized we had become their equals. More than equals, corrected Ambassador Grix. We have something they don't have. What's that? Asked Jackson. Grix's 4 arms spread in a gesture that encompassed all the assembled ambassadors. Each other. The Council rules through division and competition. The Alliance survives through cooperation and mutual support. Sarah felt a surge of pride and hope that surprised her with its intensity. 6 hours ago, she had been a failed diplomat leading a handful of rebellious species into an uncertain future. Now, she was part of something unprecedented in galactic history, a voluntary association of equals committed to defending each other's freedom. The communication alert that interrupted their planning session brought news that would test the commitment sooner than any of them had hoped. Alliance Command, this is the Aurora's dawn, came the urgent transmission from Captain Lu Wei of a human merchant vessel. We're under attack by Council forces in the Kepler corridor. Repeat, we are under attack. Request immediate assistance. Sarah looked around at the assembled ambassadors, seeing her own determination reflected in their alien features. The talking phase was over. The Council had made their move. Now it was time to see if the Terra Alliance was more than just words on a treaty. All Alliance vessels, she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of her new position as Provisional Alliance Coordinator. Proceed to Kepler Corridor at maximum speed. The Alliance protects its own. The war for galactic independence had begun. The Aurora's dawn was dying. Captain Lu Wei watched his ship's systems failing one by one as the Vrexian cruiser Blood Prophet pounded his cargo vessel with plasma cannons designed to disable rather than destroy. They wanted the ship intact, along with its cargo and crew. Standard Council procedure for dealing with rebellious elements. Capture, interrogate, make an example. But Lu Wei had no intention of becoming an example for anyone. Engineering, give me everything you can, he ordered, his voice steady despite the ship bucking around him like a wounded animal. I need another 10 minutes of engine power. Captain, came the strained voice of Engineer Chun from below decks. The containment field is failing. If we push the engines any harder, we're looking at a core breach. Then, we push them harder, Lu Wei replied. Alliance reinforcements are en route. We just need to stay alive long enough for them to arrive. Through the viewport, he could see the massive bulk of the Vrexian cruiser moving to match his evasive maneuvers. The Blood Prophet was 3 times the size of his merchant vessel, and armed with enough firepower to reduce a small moon to rubble. Under normal circumstances, this would be a slaughter. But these weren't normal circumstances. And Lu Wei had spent the last 6 months installing some very non-standard modifications to his ship. Communications, open a channel to the Vrexian vessel, he ordered. Captain, they're demanding our surrender, reported his comm officer, Lieutenant Sarah Morrison. Standard Council authority claims. Patch me through, Lu Wei said, moving to stand before the main display where the Vrexian captain could see him clearly. The screen flickered to life, revealing the intimidating bulk of Captain Vrexkull, his scaled features twisted in the expression that served his species as a predatory smile. Human vessel, you are in violation of Galactic Council transit regulations. Surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Captain Vrexkull, Lu Wei replied with the kind of polite formality that had always driven his military academy instructors crazy. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. This vessel operates under the authority of the Terra Alliance, which no longer recognizes Council jurisdiction. Vrexkull's scales shifted to the deep red that indicated rising anger. There is no Terra Alliance. There are only rebellious minor species that have forgotten their place in the galactic order. Really? Lu Wei smiled, and there was something in that expression that made the Vrexian captain's scales ripple with uncertainty. You might want to check your sensors, Captain. The first Alliance ship dropped out of hyperspace like a falling star. The UES Defiance was a human destroyer, smaller than the Vrexian cruiser, but built for speed and firepower. Its arrival was followed seconds later by the crystalline brilliance of the Altarian vessel Harmony's Edge, its hull refracting space itself in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Then came the Andromedan energy frigate Stellar Wind, its hull seeming to bend light around itself like a living thing. The Centauri stealth ship Silent Hunter simply materialized out of nowhere, its cloaking systems making its arrival as much a surprise to sensors as to the naked eye. Within minutes, 8 Alliance vessels had surrounded the lone Vrexian cruiser, and the tactical situation had reversed completely. Captain Vrexkull, Lu Wei continued, his voice carrying a note of gentle mockery. I'd like you to meet some friends of mine. I believe you're familiar with the concept of mutual defense treaties. The Vrexian captain's expression had shifted from predatory confidence to calculating concern. His ship was powerful, but it was alone and outnumbered. Standard Council doctrine called for withdrawal in such circumstances, but Lu Wei suspected that pride would override tactics. He was right. All Council vessels will stand down immediately, Vrexkull snarled. The Council does not recognize the authority of rebellious elements to operate military vessels in galactic space. The response came not from Lu Wei, but from Captain Elena Vasquez of the Defiance, her voice crackling through the calm with barely controlled fury. Council vessel Blood Prophet, This is Captain Vasquez of the Terra Alliance vessel Defiance. You are in violation of Alliance territorial space and have committed an act of war against Alliance merchant shipping. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Vrexkull's laugh was like grinding metal. 8 minor species vessels against a Vrexian cruiser? You are either very brave or very foolish, human. Let me show you the difference, Captain Vasquez replied. What followed would later be analyzed in military academies across the galaxy as a perfect example of coordinated multi-species tactical doctrine. The Alliance vessels didn't attack like a traditional fleet, with each ship operating independently. Instead, they moved like a single organism with multiple specialized parts. The Altarian vessel Harmony's Edge went first, its crystalline hull suddenly, blazing with coherent light that struck the Blood Prophet's shields like a focused star. But this wasn't a weapons attack. It was a sensor probe, mapping the Vrexian ship's defensive systems with impossible precision. The Andromedan frigate Stellar Wind followed up immediately, its energy manipulation systems turning the Altarian sensor data into a cascade of electromagnetic pulses that found every weakness in the Council ship's defenses. The Centauri stealth ship Silent Hunter used the confusion to slip through the degraded shield matrix and attach boarding pods to the Vrexian hull, while the remaining Alliance vessels moved to optimal firing positions with machine-like precision. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, the Blood Prophet hung dead in space, its weapons offline, its engines crippled, its crew facing surrender or slow death as life support systems failed. "This is impossible," Vrexkull whispered, his earlier confidence completely shattered. "Vrexian military technology is superior to anything minor species possess. Our ships are designed to face multiple opponents. Your ships are designed to face opponents who fight like you," Captain Vasquez replied. "Individually, competitively, each trying to claim the glory of victory for themselves. The Alliance fights as one." Lu Wei watched the aftermath with a mixture of pride and concern. The Alliance had won its first military engagement, but the implications were staggering. They had just destroyed a Council military vessel in what amounted to galactic space. There would be retaliation, and it would be swift and massive. But as he looked at the Alliance ships, maintaining perfect formation around his damaged merchant vessel, he realized something that sent a chill down his spine. The Alliance hadn't just won battle. They had demonstrated a level of tactical coordination that the Council's major powers had never achieved. "Captain Lu," came a new voice on the comm, this one speaking accented standard from the Altarian ship. "This is Captain Sign of the Harmony's Edge. Are your crew and cargo secure?" "Mostly intact, Captain Sign. Thanks to your arrival. The Alliance protects its own," Sign replied simply. "That is what makes us different from the Council." The rescue and salvage operation that followed demonstrated another crucial difference between Alliance and Council approaches to military cooperation. Instead of the rigid hierarchies and competing jurisdictions that characterized Council operations, the Alliance ships worked together with fluid efficiency. The Andromedan vessel used its energy manipulation capabilities to stabilize the Aurora's Dawn's failing reactor. The Altarian ship provided precision repairs using technology that could rebuild damaged systems at the molecular level. The Centauri vessel shared advanced medical facilities for injured crew members, while human ships provided security and tactical coordination. But it was the interrogation of the captured Vrexian crew that revealed information that would transform the Alliance's understanding of their situation. "The Council is mobilizing everything," reported Captain Vrexkull during his formal interrogation aboard the Defiance. His scales had shifted to the pale gray that indicated resignation or despair. 15 battle fleets. 50,000 vessels. They're calling it the Restoration Campaign. Captain Vasquez exchanged glances with Alliance Intelligence Officer Commander Park, who had been transferred from the New Geneva to coordinate battlefield intelligence gathering. 50,000 vessels seems excessive for suppressing a minor rebellion, Commander Park observed. Vrexkull's laugh was bitter. The Council leadership no longer sees this as a minor rebellion. Your withdrawal has triggered independence movements in 17 other sectors. 3 major trade routes have been disrupted by species refusing to honor Council transit agreements. The economic impact is approaching crisis levels. The implications hit Liu Wei like a physical blow. The Alliance hadn't just declared independence for 39 species. They had inadvertently sparked a galactic civil war. How long before the main Council force arrives in Alliance space? Captain Vasquez asked. 6 days, Vrexcall replied. Maybe 7 if they face resistance in the Outer Rim sectors. But, Captain, you must understand, this isn't just about military conquest anymore. The Council's entire authority structure is collapsing. They can't afford to let the Alliance succeed. Commander Park leaned forward. What do you mean? If 39 minor species can successfully secede from the Council, why not 50? Or 100? The mathematical foundation of Council authority requires the submission of the majority to the will of the minority. Prove that submission is optional, and the entire system becomes unsustainable. Liu Wei felt a chill as he processed this information. The Alliance hadn't just declared independence. They had struck at the philosophical heart of the galactic order itself. The strategic planning session that followed brought together Alliance commanders from across the fleet. The diversity was staggering. Human tactical experts working alongside Altarian systems analysts, Andromedan energy specialists coordinating with Centauri stealth operations commanders. Our intelligence suggests the Council will attempt to strike at Alliance infrastructure rather than engaging our military forces directly, reported Commander Park. They want to force a quick surrender by making independence economically impossible. What are their primary targets? Asked Captain Sign of the Harmony's Edge. Manufacturing centers, energy distribution networks, communication hubs. Anything that supports Alliance self-sufficiency. Captain Vasquez studied the holographic display showing Alliance territory, her expression thoughtful. They're thinking like the Council. Hierarchical, centralized, dependent on controlling key infrastructure points. But the Alliance doesn't work that way. Observe Captain Zexmal of the Andromedan frigate, her gaseous form shifting colors as she spoke. We're distributed, decentralized. Damage to one system doesn't cripple the whole network. Liu Wei nodded slowly, beginning to see the shape of a strategy. What if we use that against them? Let them attack infrastructure that we can rebuild or replace while we target their actual weakness. Which is? Asked Captain Sign. Unity, Liu Wei replied. The Council's strength comes from the assumption that their major powers will always cooperate against outside threats. But what happens if we can break that cooperation? The plan that emerged over the next 12 hours was unlike anything in galactic military history. Instead of preparing for a defensive war against overwhelming odds, the Alliance would go on the offensive against the Council's political structure itself. While Alliance fleets protected critical systems and evacuated vulnerable colonies, specialized task forces would strike at the economic and political relationships that held the Council together. Vrexian trade convoys would be disrupted, forcing them to choose between protecting their profits and supporting the war effort. Zephyrian diplomatic missions would face protests and sabotage from Alliance sympathizers. Council authority would be challenged on every world where minor species had grievances. It's not a military campaign, explained Alliance Coordinator Chun, addressing the assembled commanders via hologram from the diplomatic vessel New Geneva. It's a revolution, and revolutions aren't won by destroying enemies. They're won by proving that change is possible. The first test of this strategy would come sooner than anyone expected. Long-range sensors detected the Council's advance force. 3 battle fleets moving toward Alliance space with obvious hostile intent. Estimated arrival time? Asked Captain Vasquez. 18 hours, replied her sensor officer. They're not bothering with stealth or deception. This is meant to be a demonstration of power. Liu Wei looked around at the Alliance vessels maintaining formation in the Kepler corridor, representing 5 different species working together with perfect coordination. 6 months ago, most of these ships had never operated alongside alien vessels. Today, they functioned as a unified force. Then, let's give them a demonstration of our own, he said quietly. The message that went out across Alliance space was simple. The Council comes to restore their version of order. Show them what order looks like when free beings choose to stand together. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Alliance vessels from 39 different species converged on strategic points throughout the sector, not to hide or defend, but to meet the Council forces head-on and prove that the age of galactic hierarchy was ending. The Battle of Kepler Corridor was about to begin, and, with it, the real test of whether the Terra Alliance was strong enough to survive the full fury of the galactic order it had chosen to defy. As Liu Wei watched the Alliance fleet taking formation, he couldn't help but smile. The Council was about to learn the same lesson that Captain Vrexkull had learned 6 hours earlier. Sometimes the impossible was just another word for something nobody had tried before. High Counselor Zelix stood before the vast tactical display in the Council's war room, watching red markers spread across the galactic map like a viral infection. Each marker represented a world, a system, or a trade route where Council authority had been challenged, disrupted, or completely rejected in the week since the Terra Alliance's declaration of independence. "Report," he commanded, his translucent wings trembling with barely controlled fury. Admiral Krexvor of the Vrexian fleet stepped forward, his massive form radiating the kind of grim satisfaction his species showed when discussing warfare. The preliminary strikes against Alliance infrastructure have been less effective than anticipated, High Counselor. Define less effective. Krexvor's scales shifted to the darker hue that indicated discomfort. We destroyed the primary manufacturing facility on Rigel 7 as planned. The Alliance restored full production capacity within 36 hours using mobile fabrication units. And the energy distribution networks? The Andromedan systems proved more resilient than our intelligence suggested. When we severed the main power grid for the Centauri sector, 17 backup networks came online immediately. Current energy output in Alliance space is actually higher than pre-war levels. Zelix's wings spread wider, casting jagged shadows across the war room. How was that possible? The Alliance appears to have redundancy built into every critical system, admitted Admiral Krexvor. They're not operating like a traditional centralized government. It's more like a distributed organism. Remove one part, and the rest adapt to compensate. The implications of this analysis hit Zelix like a physical blow. The Council's entire military doctrine was based on striking at centralized command structures and critical infrastructure. But if the Alliance truly operated as a distributed network, what about our diplomatic initiatives? Zelix asked, turning to Counselor Plex of the Meridian Hegemony. Plex's crystalline form dimmed noticeably. The situation is deteriorating rapidly. High Counselor, the independence movement has spread to 47 additional systems in the past week alone. We're facing complete breakdown of Council authority in 3 major sectors. Explain. The Outer Rim colonies have declared neutrality and refused to provide staging areas for Council forces. The Spiral Arm Trade Federation has suspended all contracts with Council-aligned species pending review of political stability. And we've received formal protests from 18 major species regarding our military actions against the Alliance. Zelix studied the tactical display, trying to process the scope of what was happening. The red markers weren't just spreading randomly. They followed economic and cultural lines that connected species across vast distances. The Alliance hadn't just started a military rebellion. They had triggered a fundamental reevaluation of the entire galactic order. The human ambassador, Chun, he said finally. Where is she now? Unknown. High Counselor, admitted Intelligence Director Vashtil. Alliance leadership appears to be operating from mobile command centers that shift location constantly. Our attempts to locate and eliminate their decision-makers have been unsuccessful. And their military capabilities? Admiral Krexvor stepped forward again, his expression grim. They're learning. High Counselor. Fust. The Battle of Kepler Corridor should have been a simple demonstration of Council superiority. Instead, we lost 2 cruisers and a battle carrier to coordinated Alliance tactics we've never encountered before. The Battle of Kepler Corridor had been intended as a quick, decisive strike to demonstrate the futility of resistance. 3 Council battle fleets against a hastily assembled Alliance force composed primarily of converted merchant vessels and minor species patrol boats. It should have been over in hours. Instead, it had lasted 3 days and ended with Council forces withdrawing after taking heavy casualties. The Alliance had used their multi-species coordination to create tactical combinations that Council forces had no doctrine for countering. How many systems have we lost? Zelix asked quietly. Lost is the wrong term. Counselor Plex replied carefully. We haven't lost territory to enemy conquest. We've lost relevance. Species that have been council members for millennia are simply choosing not to participate in council activities anymore. The communications alert that interrupted their discussion brought news that would transform the crisis into something unprecedented in galactic history. "High Counselor," reported the communications officer, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the Nexus Prime diplomatic quarter. It's from the Andromedan Collective Home System." Zelix felt his wings go rigid. The Andromedan Collective wasn't part of the Terra Alliance. They were one of the founding members of the Galactic Council, a major power whose energy manipulation technologies were considered essential to galactic civilization. "Put it through," he ordered. The massive form of collective speaker, Zarathul, materialized in the chamber, her gaseous body contained within an elaborate ceremonial suit that marked her as one of the highest-ranking Andromedan officials. But it was her colors that sent a chill through every being in the room, the deep purple and gold that indicated formal declaration. "High Counselor Zelix," she began, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that made Andromedan speech sound like music. "The Andromedan Collective hereby serves notice of our withdrawal from the Galactic Council, effective immediately." The silence that followed was complete and absolute. If a minor species like humanity had shocked the galaxy by leaving the Council, the withdrawal of a founding member was nothing short of catastrophic. "Speaker Zarathul," Zelix managed, "surely there has been some misunderstanding. The Andromedan Collective has been instrumental in shaping Council policy for 8,000 years. Zarathul interrupted, her colors shifting to the deep red of anger. 8,000 years of watching the Council become exactly what it was created to prevent. A hierarchy based on military might rather than wisdom, economic exploitation rather than mutual benefit, the oppression of the weak by the strong. The Council maintains galactic peace. The Council maintains galactic stagnation," Zarathul corrected. "For millennia, we've watched minor species crushed beneath the weight of economic policies designed to benefit only the major powers. We've seen entire civilizations destroyed because they dared to question Council authority. The Tribunal of Vega was not an isolated incident, Counselor Zelix. It was the inevitable result of a system that treats intelligence and dignity as privileges to be earned rather than rights to be respected." Admiral Krexvor stepped forward, his aggressive posture clearly visible even through the hologram. "The Andromedans are being manipulated by human propaganda. This is clearly a coordinated alliance strategy." Zarathul's form blazed with sudden brilliance, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made the chamber itself resonate. "Vrection, Admiral, the Andromedans were practicing the principles of mutual cooperation and voluntary association when your species was still conquering neighboring systems through brute force. Do not presume to lecture us about manipulation." The display showing galactic political alignment updated in real time, and Zelix watched in horror as the withdrawal of the Andromedan Collective triggered a cascade of other defections. Species that had remained neutral began declaring independence. Trade networks that had operated under Council authority for millennia simply stopped acknowledging Council oversight. But it was the communication from the Nexus Prime orbital platforms that delivered the final blow to the Council's authority. "High Counselor," the platform commander reported, "we're detecting massive energy signatures approaching the system. It appears to be an Alliance fleet, sir." The tactical display shifted to show the approaching vessels, and what Zelix saw there redefined his understanding of the situation completely. This wasn't a fleet of converted merchant ships and patrol boats. This was a coordinated armada representing dozens of species, including several that had never worked together before. Human dreadnoughts flew in formation with Andromedan energy cruisers. Altarian crystal ships shared tactical data with Centauri stealth frigates. Rigel Commonwealth battle platforms coordinated with Vegan Trade Federation escort carriers. It was a sight that should have been impossible. Species with completely different military traditions and technologies operating as a unified force. "Numbers?" Zelix asked faintly. "Approximately 6,000 vessels, High Counselor, and they're requesting permission to dock at Nexus Prime." The audacity was staggering. The Alliance was bringing a massive fleet to the Council's capital world and asking permission to dock as if this were a routine diplomatic mission. their stated purpose? Zelix asked. They wish to address the Galactic Council, sir. Formally, Zelix looked around the war room at the assembled council leadership, seeing his own confusion and fear reflected in their alien faces. They had spent the past week trying to suppress a rebellion through military force, only to discover that they were facing something far more dangerous than rebellion. They were facing revolution, and now the revolutionaries wanted to talk. The communication came directly to the council chamber, broadcast openly on all frequencies so that every world in the galaxy could witness what happened next. The face that appeared on the main display belonged to Ambassador Sarah Chun, but she looked different somehow. Gone was the careful deference that had characterized her years as humanity's representative to the council. In its place was a quiet confidence that made her seem larger than the massive chamber around her. High Counselor Zelix, she began, members of the Galactic Council. I come before you today not as a petitioner seeking the Council's approval, but as the representative of a new galactic order that has emerged from the failure of the old. The Alliance recognizes no authority to, Zelix began, but Sarah cut him off with a gesture. The Terra Alliance, joined now by the Andromedan Collective and 43 other species representing 67% of the galaxy's population, extends an offer of peaceful coexistence to the remaining council member species. The chamber erupted in angry voices, but Sarah continued speaking, her words somehow carrying over the chaos. We offer trade agreements based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Defense treaties based on voluntary cooperation rather than intimidation. Cultural exchanges based on respect for diversity rather than enforced conformity. You offer chaos, Zelix shouted, his wings spread wide in fury. Without the Council's authority, the galaxy will collapse into warfare and anarchy. Sarah's smile was gentle but implacable. High Counselor, the galaxy is already at war. The only question is whether it will be a war to preserve an unjust system or a war to build something better. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. On the tactical display, the Alliance fleet hung in space around Nexus Prime like a constellation of stars, each ship representing a species that had chosen freedom over security, hope over tradition. Zelix looked around at the remaining council members. Less than 40 species now, mostly major powers who had benefited from the old system. They still commanded impressive military forces, still controlled significant economic resources. But for the first time in his long political career, Zelix found himself wondering if military force and economic power were enough. The Alliance had something the Council had never possessed, the willing cooperation of free beings who had chosen to stand together. And as the reports continued to stream in from across the galaxy, showing species after species choosing the Alliance over the Council, Zelix began to understand the true scope of what Sarah Chun had accomplished. She hadn't just walked away from diplomacy. She had made diplomacy irrelevant by proving that voluntary cooperation could accomplish what centuries of hierarchical authority had failed to achieve. The age of the Galactic Council was ending. Whether it would end in peaceful transition or destructive warfare remained to be seen. But as Zelix watched the Alliance fleet maintaining perfect formation around the capital of the galaxy, he realized that the choice was no longer his to make. The Council could adapt to the new reality, or it could be swept aside by it. But it could no longer control it. The revolution had already won. 2 years had passed since the day Ambassador Sarah Chun walked out of the Galactic Council chamber, and the galaxy barely resembled the place it had been before. The grand halls of Nexus Prime still stood, but they now hosted a very different kind of gathering. Sarah stood at the observation deck of the orbital conference facility that had been built to accommodate the new reality of galactic politics. Below her, representatives from over 300 species moved through chambers designed not for hierarchy and dominance, but for conversation and collaboration. The architecture itself told the story of what had changed. Instead of towering platforms that elevated major powers above minor ones, the new facility featured circular amphitheaters where every voice carried equal weight. Hard to believe it's only been 2 years, said Lieutenant Commander Jackson Reed, now wearing the insignia of Alliance diplomatic security. He joined Sarah at the viewing window, looking down at the unprecedented gathering taking place below. Some days it feels like yesterday, Sarah replied. Other days, it feels like the old council was something from ancient history. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. The 6 months following the Alliance's Declaration of Independence had seen warfare across 17 sectors as Council forces attempted to restore their authority through military action. But for every Alliance system they attacked, 3 more Council member species declared independence. The mathematics of revolution had proven inexorable. The breaking point had come when the Zephyrian Empire itself fractured, with 3 of its member states choosing Alliance membership over continued submission to Council hierarchy. High Councilor Zelix had been forced to choose between civil war within his own empire or acceptance of the new galactic reality. He had chosen acceptance, though Sarah suspected it had been one of the most difficult decisions of his long political career. Status report on the integration process? Sarah asked, turning away from the window to face the holographic display that showed the current state of galactic politics. Remarkable progress, replied Dr. Yuki Tanaka, now serving as Alliance Economic Coordinator. Trade volume between former Council and Alliance species has increased by 400% over pre-war levels. The elimination of Council trade restrictions and monopolistic practices has created economic growth that benefits everyone involved. The numbers were staggering, but Sarah had learned not to be surprised by what free beings could accomplish when allowed to cooperate without interference. The old council system had been designed to channel economic benefits toward major powers, creating artificial scarcity that kept minor species dependent. The alliance model of voluntary mutual aid had unleashed productivity that no one had imagined possible. What about the holdout systems? Jackson asked. Down to 12, reported Admiral Maria Santos, her tone carrying a mixture of satisfaction and concern. The Vrexian Consortium is the largest remaining Council Loyalist faction, but their support base is eroding rapidly. Internal intelligence suggests they're facing economic collapse within 6 months if they don't join the Alliance trade networks. Sarah nodded, studying the display that showed the remaining Council territory. It was a strange irony that the species that had been most committed to the old system of dominance and exploitation were now the ones suffering most from its collapse. The Vrexians had built their entire civilization around the concept of economic predation, using council authority to extract resources from weaker species. Without that authority, they were discovering that their own systems were far more dependent on others than they had realized. Any signs that they're considering joining the Alliance? Admiral Santos shook her head. Pride is preventing them from accepting what they see as surrender. They'd rather face economic ruin than acknowledge that the Alliance model works better than their own. It was a familiar pattern. In the 2 years since the revolution began, Sarah had watched species after species struggle with the transition from hierarchy to cooperation. Some, like the Andromedans, had embraced the change immediately, recognizing it as a return to their own ancient values. Others, particularly those that had benefited most from the old system, found it nearly impossible to accept that their privileges had been built on the oppression of others. Incoming transmission from the Centauri delegation, reported Communications Officer Park. They're ready to present their proposal for the new Galactic Charter. Sarah felt a flutter of anticipation. The Galactic Charter project had been under development for 18 months, representing the collective effort of 287 species to create a framework for galactic civilization that would prevent the mistakes of the old council system. If approved, it would formally establish the Terra Alliance as the foundation for a new kind of galactic government. Put it through to the main assembly hall, Sarah ordered. This is what we've been working toward. The main assembly hall of the new facility was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of the rigid hierarchies of the old council chamber, it featured a complex three-dimensional arrangement that allowed every species to interact with every other species on equal terms. Floating platforms adjusted automatically to accommodate different atmospheric requirements, gravity preferences, and communication methods. As Sarah took her place at the central coordination platform, she could see representatives from across the known galaxy. Crystalline beings whose thoughts moved faster than light. Ancient space-dwelling entities that had watched civilizations rise and fall for millions of years. Young species taking their first steps into the broader galactic community. What they all shared was the choice to be here. No one had been forced to join the Alliance. No one had been coerced into accepting Alliance authority. Every species present had made the voluntary decision to participate in this grand experiment in galactic cooperation. Beings of the galaxy, Sarah began, her words carried by translation systems that could handle over 4,000 different languages and communication methods. We gather today to complete the work we began 2 years ago when we chose cooperation over domination, voluntary association over enforced hierarchy. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Not applause. Many species present had no concept of applause, but a harmonic convergence of approval that seemed to make the space itself resonate with shared purpose. Ambassador Taith of the Altarian Republic chimed forward, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into patterns of impossible beauty. The Charter Commission has completed its work. We present to you the framework for a galactic civilization based on the principles that have guided the Terra Alliance since its founding. The holographic display that materialized in the center of the chamber showed the proposed charter in visual form, its principles represented as interconnected networks rather than hierarchical structures. The basic framework was elegant in its simplicity: voluntary association. No species could be forced to join or remain in the galactic community. Membership was a choice, freely made and freely revocable. Mutual aid. Member species would contribute what they could and receive what they needed, with contributions and benefits determined through negotiation rather than exploitation. Cooperative security. Military action would only be taken in defense of member species, and only with the consent of those being defended. No species would be forced to participate in conflicts they didn't support. Cultural autonomy. Each species would govern itself according to its own values and traditions, with galactic coordination limited to matters that affected multiple species. Open innovation. Scientific and technological advances would be shared freely among member species, with credit given to innovators, but no species allowed to monopolize knowledge that could benefit others. "It's beautiful," whispered Jackson, and Sarah realized that he was right. The Charter represented something that had never existed in galactic history: a framework for civilization that was designed to serve all beings rather than privileging a chosen few. But it was the presentation by the former Council species that truly demonstrated how much the galaxy had changed. High Counselor Zelix stepped forward, his once proud bearing now marked by the humility that came from recognizing past mistakes. The Zephyrian Empire formally apologizes for the centuries of injustice perpetuated under Council authority. We pledge our full cooperation in the transition to the new galactic order and our commitment to the principles of equality and mutual respect. Admiral Krexvor of the Vrexian military followed, his massive form somehow seeming smaller than Sarah remembered. The Vrexian people ask forgiveness for the harm we have caused through our pursuit of economic dominance. We request membership in the Terra Alliance and pledge to use our knowledge of military tactics solely for the defense of Alliance worlds. One by one, the former major powers of the Old Council stood before the Assembly and acknowledged their role in creating the system of oppression that the Alliance had overthrown. It was unprecedented in galactic history. Powerful species voluntarily surrendering their privileges and asking to join a system where they would be equals rather than rulers. But it was the final speaker who delivered the moment that would define the future of galactic civilization. Collective Speaker Arthal of the Andromedans floated forward, her gaseous form blazing with colors that spoke of profound emotion. 8,000 years ago, the first Galactic Council was founded with noble intentions: to bring peace and prosperity to all beings. Over the millennia, those intentions became corrupted by the belief that some species deserved to rule while others deserved to serve. Her form shifted to the deep gold that indicated formal declaration. Today, we have the opportunity to fulfill the original promise of galactic civilization, not through the dominance of the strong over the weak, but through the cooperation of equals, not through the imposition of order from above, but through the voluntary choice of free beings to stand together. The vote that followed was unlike anything in galactic history. Instead of formal balloting conducted according to rigid procedures, it was a spontaneous expression of collective will. Species after species stood and declared their acceptance of the Charter, their commitment to the principles it embodied, their willingness to work together as equals. The final tally was 287 species in favor, with only the handful of remaining Council holdouts abstaining. The Terra Alliance had officially become the foundation for a new galactic order. But, for Sarah, the real moment of victory came 3 hours later, in a small conference room where she found herself face-to-face with High Counselor Zelix. "You were right, Ambassador Chun," he said quietly, his wings folded in the position that indicated deep respect. "Everything you said in the council chamber that day was correct. We have become exactly what we claimed to oppose, an empire built on the oppression of those we considered inferior." Sarah studied his face, seeing genuine regret in his compound eyes. "The important thing isn't what we were, Counselor Zelix. It's what we choose to become." "What do you think we'll become?" he asked. "This new galactic order, this alliance of equals, can it really work? Can hundreds of species with different values, different needs, different ways of understanding the universe truly cooperate without someone in charge to enforce order?" Sarah smiled, looking out the conference room window at the Alliance fleet maintaining perfect formation around the orbital facility. Human ships flying alongside Andromedan energy cruisers. Altarian crystal vessels sharing space with Centauri stealth frigates. Vrexian battle platforms operating in harmony with species they had once considered prey. "Counselor," she said, "we already are." The revolution that had begun with a single word, no, had become something greater than anyone had imagined. It had become proof that free beings could choose cooperation over competition, that diversity could be a source of strength rather than division, that the universe was large enough for everyone to thrive. As Sarah watched the representatives of 287 species working together to plan their shared future, she realized that humanity hadn't just walked away from diplomacy. They had walked towards something better, a galactic civilization built not on the submission of the weak to the strong, but on the willing cooperation of equals. The Galactic Council had finally understood, but by then, it was too late to stop the revolution. It was only late enough to join it. And, in the end, that had made all the difference.